that's big, but it's work.
Yeah, that is big though.
That's a big one. That's a big trip. Yeah, so it's exciting. It's not exciting, but my mom's birthday,
That's really exciting, yeah.
a lot of us are going. Her sister, she's the youngest of us. She's got two sisters that are still.
Hi.
Oh, that's her 82-year-old sister and 84-year-old sister are going.
All right. Hello.
Never, ever, never.
Hello. How are you?
Okay, so it's
Yes. Hello. Good to see you. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, that's your spot, isn't it? Saved your spot for you.
So kind. How's it going?
How are you? Hi, how are you?
I'm feeling great today.
Hello there. How are you doing?
Hello, everybody.
Coffee for each of you.
Oh, it's the low-cal spread.
He was determined. This is like,
Good. And Janine got
Yeah,
you these.
I thought we
Yeah,
were
I
just
just sugar to help you
if
power
anybody
through.
wanted to, like,
Perfect.
because
That's what I was thinking.
that way we're not.
Exactly. It's just here. Yep. Yeah. Exactly my thought as well. Okay. That's the right idea.
We've been by local, huh?
Yeah.
It wasn't until I went to
Dive right in and grab it.
microwavable,
yeah.
Yeah, I just sit down.
sort of,
Dive right in.
health, whatever that is not filming here. So, I know, but it's just, I know, like when you're out there and you give joy.
The disc looks wicked, so.
Joy, you just came back from Atlanta?
I did. Did I tell you that? Oh, I was like,
I was in Atlanta Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
oh yes, I got there on Sunday, and my kids are there now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was running, not running, but I was doing the technology for a board meeting.
Oh yeah, with your the
100 Black Men in America.
Did I tell you? What, did we come up with the name? Because I did remember from GAA. It was
It's been good.
again now I forgot.
GAA.
It was Kennard, not Kennard, Picard. William
Oh,
Picard.
oh,
Bill
yeah.
Picard.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
feels too short to
Bill
get my
Picard.
kids
Bill
back
Picard.
at
Yep.
school as
That
of
was him.
last
Okay.
week, and I just felt like we never settled into summer, and it was
she
like
said
back
it
to
is
school
him.
because it was
Yeah,
a lot of traveling.
yeah, no Bill well.
Going to my
I say
parents,
well, he's
start camp.
been to a ton of our
Well,
stuff.
my husband and my kids did. I
Dog
had a
man.
lot of travel for work.
Gave the
so
money
I
to
didn't go,
gave
but,
some money to
Yeah, so they had a good
Clark
time.
in
And
Tommy George's name.
Yes, he did.
you know,
He's got a lot of money to give.
He does in fact do that. He does.
This is the last week that we're sort of,
yeah, the last
trying to make
hurrah.
it to the first day of school, you know.
It's the most wonderful
How she gets to go around giving them in his name. In
Oh, give the money out?
name.
Oh, how wonderful is that?
So what he did, my his mother.
Oh, wow.
So my cousin,
Still, amongst 4 camps and a month away.
his
we
mother,
still
my
have
mother.
Sort of dead period.
It's not close enough for you to be like really excited.
Oh, that was cool.
He said their names, so their friends called them. And my mother was like, wait, what? It was so funny.
That is hilarious.
I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, thank you.
Best idea.
Just read some article about Japanese.
I mean, they got so many calls, emails, texts. Just come in the graduation. You just gave, oh my God.
The manager.
Be there, that I want to be there.
I mean,
Yeah, I know when that happened.
We'll close flowers.
It was just so funny.
That was-
Yeah, she doesn't leave for another, it's been really hard on her, not like.
What's really awful is to see
But she doesn't leave until the end of September, so she's kind of freaking
Because you
out.
know, Ward House always got that.
It's gone, everybody's in school, and I'm like, just,
Mark was kind of like a stepchild.
I'm like,
That's worse.
you're gonna be fine, don't worry about it.
busy.
I don't know if I told you this, but my dear friend is
She's gotta kind of start figuring out.
San Francisco, went to Colorado, went to Scotland.
When I say dear friend, I'm talking about
This was our busiest travel. Because the last one lasted Colorado. Yeah, so
like her third or fourth act.
for Vicky and I, yeah.
So she said,
Me? Like we got a
Come on over.
Well, no, we were like, well, let's do it this summer. It's all good.
so what she did,
There is no money.
My nephew was graduating from St. Andrews. That was the reason. And we took. Just because, I mean, we were literally,
To me at all.
VRBO was on golf.
I'm telling you now.
they left there and ran to
Yeah, we were in, we went
Yeah.
you know, you go to Europe and it's Edinburgh, St. Andrews, Inverness. I really liked it. It was kind of cool. Glasgow.
I said that we would probably pass
Wu-Tang Clan. In Glasgow. A buddy of, my son who went with us has got one of his buddies from Asheville runs teleprompters for Wu-Tang. So we got backstage passes, didn't hang out with the guys, right? They were like, they're off limits. But it was kind of cool just to be on stage, check it out. And also just to go to a hip hop concert in your country and see how it works. And, it was fun. It was great. They went to this place called Hydro. And I was like, hey, I use this for something else. And all they use it for is like live music. Right? And it holds about 15,000 people. So it's not huge. So think about Bojangles Coliseum. And it was just, man, it was
I saw that stuff.
they were having a good time on a Tuesday night in Glasgow.
This summer, a year and a half.
It was crazy. It was crazy. And Nas was with them too, so Wu-Tang did about an hour worth of music. Nas came in and did about an hour's worth of music, and then they all came back on stage.
And then I realized, wow,
Oh, really? I mean, that's hard, right? I mean,
and it was funny, I was telling a friend, because somebody was trying to be like, why does it seem especially the social media pieces that you see right now, I'm like, maybe I'm stretching this class,
which I liked.
their formidable years, sophomore year, where you basically
It's a huge corporation. I can't think of who it is.
you were forced to be with your family, and you did not go through
Yeah,
that.
forced, yep.
Because like I remember being like, the ninth grade.
That might be a president. That might be a president. That's the only reason why. That's the reason I wanted to be the first
Part of her freshman year.
But I came in.
And that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. So she said, and she had huge art collection already.
Because we were forced during that.
It's quite amazing. Because if I influence when I go there,
TV guy. Remember he told me
when I got there,
people do what they know,
doing something, so I
right? And see that connectivity.
If I'm not doing it,
That's very cool.
the little icons for the difference.
and the artwork is
Dug that out in the Sunday paper and then kept it like that.
Kept it for the week.
How are you? How you feeling?
I thought, no, it's not an Atlantis corporation at all.
Finish up in December.
Are there other task force chairs?
Coach board.
I stopped. I don't like watching TV.
What's that?
What's happening? Like, she's gonna catch like
something really major, we're gonna catch on Instagram.
Not them, somebody else, whoever's the president.
They had less. They follow like WCMC or local channels here. So at least I can, if there's something major I should know about. Yeah, something major I should know about. Not like, you know, pipe in, or my husband's a big news person. But so he'll like just hear about it.
What tornado? I guess there was one that was up north. That was, I hope my email didn't know about it.
Could everybody please take their seats, Bria? Could everybody please take their seats, Bria? We're going to go ahead and get started, so we will turn the meeting over to Cindy.
That was perfect.
So welcome, everybody. I'm sure more people will be coming, but we want to start on time because we'd like to get out on time. And we have a lot to go through today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your feedback on the strategy statements. Just thanks for your service and everything else. One thing I want to mention is we have here the community impact report of the Picasso exhibit. And they didn't send enough for the whole room, but I'm just going to start passing around. If you would like one, please take one. They're really, it's kind of impressive. And some of us, they already mailed one to us, so feel free. So I'm just going to show them that way. Feel free to take one. And it really is an interesting look, see at how that went. So today, we're going to look at all the draft strategies so that we'll be ready to go for the public input next round. And hopefully we'll get a little bit of time to do some updates on the implementation plans. And that's why we ask you for your feedback ahead, so we could maybe get through a lot today. But we'll get through what we can get through. That's the goal, okay? So with that, I think I'm going to turn over to Joy.
Yes. Thank you very much. I am so excited to be here today we are going to move quickly through, just kind of talk about where we are, again, reminding you of the schedule and what we have done, where we've been and where we're going. We're going to discuss and confirm the draft strategies. Actually, we're going to confirm them as, I'm going to stand up, as Cindy mentioned, the reason that we sent them in advance was because we wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to read them, think about them, and to send responses. And so thank you so much for sending the responses, and thank you also to those of you who let us know, these worked for you. So we did receive a handful of suggested edits, but by and large, it seemed like most of the strategies work for people. So we will go through those suggested edits and look for confirmation of these strategies. And then, as Cindy mentioned, we'll also have some time to discuss the implementation plans. So essentially, our big picture goals for today are to discuss the edits on the strategies and to confirm the strategies and to discuss get feedback on the updated implementation plans. Okay, so confirm the strategies and feedback on the updated implementation plans. I do want to, so you have those goals. I want, if we can, take a moment for Priya to talk through the schedule, where we are and where we're going.
Sure. This is on. Hello. Hello, everyone. Great to see you. I've missed you so. Yep, this is just checking back in with an updated version of the schedule timeline that you have seen in the last couple of meetings. So you can see here's where we are today with the two key items we're focusing on in this meeting. And then, as Joy and Cindy mentioned, we're seeking to, once we confirm the strategy statements that this group is comfortable with, then tomorrow we are going to open the public feedback period, and it's going to be a similar approach to what we did with the State of Culture the State of Culture Report public feedback period, which we had great participation in. And we're also going to be having some conversations with Cindy and county folks, and then we will be gathering all that feedback and then coming back to you, as you probably hopefully saw in the packet that you received by email, and also believe everyone has copies right now that Janine has provided. We are planning to add an additional steering group meeting on September 12th to make sure that this group has the opportunity to discuss, to hear what the feedback that was collected, and for us to talk together and confirm how we're going to be incorporating that feedback into the plan document. And so that's an important discussion opportunity. And from that meeting, we're going to then work very quickly with the consultant and staff teams to actually incorporate that feedback into the document, and then share that back with you in advance of the September 19th, which would be our regular monthly meeting date. And so our goal, so the tentative plan is that we would give you that updated document that has all that feedback incorporated, and come into that September 19th meeting wanting to discuss that together and hopefully seek your approval on the revised document. So that would be wanting to confirm the final plan with the steering group. And then so you can see what that would lead to is, of course, pending approval of the steering group on the plan document, then we would present that to council, but not before the steering group is comfortable with the document. So this is the timeline that we're aiming for, and what the steps are that you received in your packet as well. Before we move into the main, purpose number one of the meeting, does anyone have any questions about the timeline? I don't know, Cindy and Kevin, if you want to add anything?
No.
Okay. Yes, Krista.
The part about the public feedback, it's only going to be on the draft strategies, but they won't get a copy of the draft of the plan. Is that
not the implementation plan? Yeah. So typically, and Joy, maybe you can speak a little bit more to that process. Yeah.
Yes. So at this point, for the public feedback, we'll be looking for up through the draft strategies, the public will receive that information. We're at that point, that's where we're stopping, because typically in the process, that's the big picture of what it's kind of like a strategic plan where you're working through your goals. You want to make sure everyone is in agreement on the goals, so that would be analogous to the priorities, and then your objectives, and that would be analogous to the strategies. So that's where we are in the process, and that's what we would be going to the public with that feedback. The implementation plans are similar to what you might call your work plans or your action plans in the strategic planning process, and those don't typically need to be not approved, I don't want to use that word, but kind of get feedback from the public on those things.
And in my experience, I think it's because that's so granular.
Exactly.
It's sort of more granular and further past sort of that level of detail that this group and the task forces have spent so much time thinking about and working on.
But the context for someone that, say, is new to the community, that's never been a part, they'll get a reminder, I guess, the State of Arts and Culture report, and then drove into this. Okay.
Yes.
I just trying to understand, so it's not just draft strategies, there's context.
There's context leading up to.
Yes. Thank you. That's a great point. And so just so that everyone's clear on where this, like literally the specific next steps is, so once this group, we've in this meeting, we've confirmed, okay, so we're good with what the strategy statements are now. So that language that everyone here gives a thumbs up to today. Tomorrow, we will be publishing it just as we did with the Emerging Insights in the State of Culture report back in spring. We will be publishing the draft strategy language, along with the priorities, of course, on the Arts and Culture Planning webpage that we have had up for these many months. We're going to publish that, and along with the link about the virtual public meeting session that we're going to have, which will be August 30th.
Now you're asking me the real questions.
Yeah,
it's actually in our schedule.
And then it'll be, we're also publishing the survey, just like we did.
August
survey.
30th.
Thank you, August 30th. Okay, so that's right.
That's the
Thank you.
virtual public meeting?
That's the virtual public session. And then along with that, there's an online survey. And that is also launching tomorrow along with the publication of the strategies. And so that'll stay up for a couple of weeks. And so then the meeting happens basically halfway through that period. So people can, there's both the online survey method that people can provide feedback, and there's also the virtual public meeting discussion that people can use, or they can do both if they want. Yeah, yes. Oh, yes, Grace.
Priya, for the September 12th steering meeting, who would be part of that meeting?
So that would be our same steering group.
Okay.
Yeah. And so along with the Lord,
Yes.
team with
The
Joy.
Lord team.
Yeah. And so that's where it would be reconvening the same group that's been the steering group to discuss the feedback that we've received and how we propose to incorporate that feedback.
And no outside stakeholders or anyone?
Not at that meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, people are always welcome to attend these meetings,
Yeah.
sit around the edge of the room.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right. No, yeah, it would be a public meeting, just like this meeting is right here, especially because it's because the advisory board is the core of the steering group. So, yeah.
And
And
I bring
then-
that up only because I know folks have expressed interest in participating.
Yeah.
So this could be a good opportunity. Thank
Oh,
you.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Every one of these is a great opportunity for folks, and we're happy when folks come to attend them. So,
will
I
there be-
think
Will there be only one virtual public meeting?
Yes, that's the plan right now. And we're following the approach that we did back in spring because we found there was really good participation.
I would remind you that school starts back on the 28th.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first week of school, and your only virtual public meeting is in the middle of that first week back to school. I just think that needs to be considered.
Check on curriculum night stuff. Is tonight's my son's curriculum night?
Mm-hmm.
Could you turn your mic on, Charles? Couldn't hear you.
Might want to check the schedule for curriculum night for
Okay.
the school system, because that'll just take people out.
Okay.
I would just
We'll make a
ask
note.
us to be considerate of setting something that important that you want feedback and participation in the middle of the return to school.
Noted, for sure. Thank you for that feedback.
Yep, thank you. Yeah. Yes, Meg.
Do you know how many people filled out the survey back in the spring in response to the State of Culture report?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but we can find out from the Lord team.
I can find out, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how much participation we had if we're replicating that process. Do we feel like that was
It was an enormously successful process.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
but I can get that.
What felt successful to you? What made it seem successful?
We can get the numbers for the survey as well as participation for the virtual public conversation. We had over 200 RSVPs, and then we had substantively over 120 participants in the public conversation.
I think it was
virtual
around
public
130.
yeah.
And then
I could safely say over 120. That's
right.
but that's great.
Well, I think
yeah.
until the very end of the meeting, it was still around 100, where sometimes people drop off. So for a 2-hour discussion about policy, for folks to stay on the entire time and still have
Correct.
100 people at the end, we were very happy. And the other piece was not just the quantity, but it was the quality of the discussion. We found to be people were very engaged, and so we felt like the feedback was really helpful.
People had read the State of Culture report. They had comments on the insights. They were, which is what we had called that priority portion at that time. And the feedback was, and I just want to remind you that culture is a space that it's different from a transportation plan, for example, because the whole city drives on roads. So the fact that we had that level of engagement was really wonderful.
Any other questions or feedback or suggestions before we move from the timeline? Nope. Okay. If you think of anything as we go along, of course, but in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead.
Sorry, Priya,
Yeah.
I just want, if whoever's doing the communication on that, if you want to send us the language and the imagery that's used, because I think one of the things that did help drive traffic last time, regardless of whether we say it's successful or not, was a large number of us got in on that and sent out that information.
Absolutely, yeah.
And give us what we need to get people to look at that report.
Absolutely, thank you. And that's a great reminder that we will be pushing it out on social media. And so I know last time many of you did, repost it or share it or just forwarded it in your emails to contacts. So we would really appreciate that. And so I'll send that out tomorrow. Our comms team will be posting those things online and then sharing it on social media. And the other thing I also want to say is we are working, so we had worked with community partners to also receive feedback from the Spanish-speaking community, and so that was really helpful. And so with the State of Culture report, so we're also coordinating with them to have another session which is in Spanish, so where they will present the strategies in Spanish and receive the feedback as well. So it will be both languages. Okay. Joy, could you you probably just did that, a note about us sending things out
yes,
so folks can
that's
share. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over back to you, Joy. And I'll just mention one thing we're going to do. Well, Joy, you'll say this too, but I'm just standing up here because we actually want to be able to make any tweaks to language in real time right here on the slide so that you can see it as we go. So
before Joy steps up, as we start going through the priorities and then the implementation steps, we thought it was important to get you all to think a minute about what we're embarking upon, and Kevin's gonna give you all some thoughts of his, and, and I support them totally. So.
Oh, you don't know what I'm saying. I got the mic. No. First of all, hello everybody. I was thinking through this, and I look around the room, and we have a very diverse group, and I don't mean that just by race, but however you want to define it. We have a very diverse group, which means we all got a lot of different ideas. And which is good, by the way, all this is good. We bring to the table all these different thoughts, ideas, and what we're going to try to do now is agree on everything. and that's not an easy task, and I want to put this forward to everybody. My assumption, and I'm assuming this is correct, that nobody in this room is going to get everything they want out of this plan. The other assumption I'm going to make is that everybody in this room is going to get something they want out of this plan. With that said, we have got to be, as a body, be willing to compromise. And I'm not saying compromise on core principles, and if there's some core principles we've got to battle, let's battle them inside here and make sure that's done. So by no means do I believe in putting aside core principles, but we're going to have to compromise. The other thing that goes along with that, if we don't come to a unanimous agreement, we're basically going to fail. And let me tell you what I mean by that. we have got to go to the city, a public body, and get them to agree with what we're doing. And oh, by the way, if this is going to work, we got to figure out how to go to the county, who in theory isn't even a part of this. They are a little bit, but we've been through that before. I don't need to explain that. We've got to get them to agree too. And then we've got to look at the private sector and say, we need y'all to agree. So what I'm asking, and I'll get your hand in 1 second. What I'm simply asking for is that we need to have some strong, robust conversation as we go through these strategies. But at the end of the day, we got to figure out how we can all agree on what we're trying to do. And that's easy. It's something that's I've been thinking about a lot going through this process and just listening to some of the conversations that we've even had in our group alone. So let me stop there.
Well, thank you for sharing this, Kevin, but did I miss a meeting or miss something? At what point did this also become about engaging the county as well?
Okay, let me explain that.
Because they have been kind of miffed that they have been left outside of all of this.
So let me explain what I meant by that. Because that, by the way, was a personal comment. That's not something that's you knew I was going to say.
Okay.
But let me tell you why I said it that way. Every document way back when we were trying to decide from a board perspective, and you remember this, from a board perspective, when we were sending out the RFP, remember we said you can't just look at city, you got to look at city county? Remember we said that from day one.
Mm-hmm.
Although the politics here have been city-oriented in everything we've done, at some point in time, we're going to have to cross that bridge. Now, I'm not saying it's all of us in the room. Maybe it's city manager, the county. I don't know how it's going to happen. But at some point in time, this is a Charlotte-Mecklenburg issue, not just in the four walls of Charlotte. That's the only reason why I said it that way.
Well, I don't want to take from the agenda today, but given what you said, I think the board needs to have another meeting to have a conversation to drill specifically down on that piece, given that it is happening this late in the game.
So, and Priya, I'm stepping out of bounds, and and Priya, correct me if I'm wrong, the county has received.
Yeah, can I just clarify?
That. So it's not like it's blind to them. That's right. What I was trying to get to.
Also, yeah, so I just want to clarify that it's not, I don't know that it's happening late in the game. So the county has been involved in some ways. So the deputy county manager joined the steering group in June when it was formed. And so the county has received all of the communications that the steering group has received, all of the draft documents, all of the requests for feedback, invitations for feedback. So all of the correspondence and all of the documents the county has received in the form of the deputy county manager. There were some county staff who participated in a session in December, I believe, Joy, correct me if I'm wrong, which was part of the development of the draft State of Culture report. And so that was facilitated by Lord, and it was one of the workshops. So we had a session with the city staff, we had a session with county staff, and so they participated in that. And and also the county manager and the county commissioners were interviewed as part of the stakeholder interviews that took place in the research. And then, so those are the various engagement methods for the last several months. And then tomorrow, we actually have a staff-to-staff briefing with the county manager and the deputy county manager while Joy is here in town, so that we can walk through the draft arts and culture plan and these strategies following today's steering group discussion. And so we have had a conversation with Cindy and Kevin, as well as some of our advisory board members, Charles, I know you and Melody and others, had participated in sharing some thoughts on the need to do that, and reached out to Cindy and Kevin and myself. And so we talked about it. We discussed with the city manager, you know, we have been discussing with the city manager in ways to engage. So those are some of the ways, and I think that there have also just been other conversations that I have not been in, but you know, that board leadership has been a part of. So hopefully that helps just to kind of share some of what that engagement has been and is going to be. Oh, and I should say one other thing is that we hope to, after speaking with the deputy county manager and the county manager, to then be able to go back and meet with county commissioners following the staff conversation. Good? Yep, I'm okay.
So know that there have been all the way along the way touch points with the county, and there continue to be, and there are, Kevin and I and a few others have had conversations with the county manager, as we have with the city manager. So we've been trying really hard since sometime late last fall to make sure we're not, all the things that Pri already said we did early on, but to make sure we're keeping that loop flowing, the information flowing. So, so I'm not as concerned as I might be.
I'll let it go for now. So
finish saying what you're saying. So let's not leave a pause here.
I personally know that there are some commissioners who have real concern with this work. And part of that concern is that's not normally the work that the county does to begin with, and some resistance to the idea that the city's going to come up with a plan and then give it to us and then want us to fund it. So I'm already getting that feedback.
Okay.
And I know that there was some initial resistance when the county manager was approached early on to provide county funding to this general group, where she said no. So.
I'm going to say this. So that's not exactly what happened initially.
Okay, all right, okay.
Some folks from the city side talked to county commissioners.
Okay.
And I'm going to say this because that was the wrong way to go about it.
Okay.
On both sides of the street, being an old pole that I am, I normally try to go to the managers first, make sure they understand all the I's and T's and pieces of it, and then go to elected officials with their guidance. Dina, I think, got left out of the initial loop. And that, in my opinion, that created some friction.
Okay.
So we're hoping we've been working to solve that.
Okay. I'll let it go for now.
Okay.
'Cause I know we
And
got
we'll see it. I mean, we may not be successful at all, but we're working on it.
So I'm gonna turn this over. The whole point is, unless there's any other questions, you know, we've got to make sure we come together as a team, and this is the place to iron it out, especially as we go through these 8 strategies, because this will be fundamental as it relates to the plan itself. So Joy, I think it's your turn.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that, because you are 100% right, Kevin, and thank you all. Again, it cannot be said enough. Thank you for reading the materials in advance and for giving us such great feedback. The good news is, as I noted, you'll hear me noting a few things over and over and over again, because I want to make sure that, that they're caught. So we only received a handful of suggested edits, and for the majority of the strategy statements, there were no edits. So when you look at this presentation, what we have done is notated in red where there are edits and what the nature of the edit is. To stream, for those strategies where there are no edits, essentially we'll simply confirm and then we'll move on, because we want to make sure that we get to the strategies that had edits, and that we're able to discuss them and give them the due that is needed. To streamline this discussion, we have moved the strategies for priorities 4 and 5 towards the to the ending portion of the priorities, simply because we do have discussion on those two that we think will take a little bit more time. And all of the others, we think we can move fairly quickly through, okay? And then one more modification, just want to make to request of this group as a kind of collegial thing. We would like to go through priority number 6 first, simply because the head of that task force needs to leave a little bit earlier. And so we'd like to be able to get to that, make sure that that's all confirmed before she needs to move. If everybody is okay with that, I think this is not an official meeting, so I don't need a vote on it, just want head nods, or if there's any issues with moving to number 6 first. Okay, looking like everybody's agreeing with that. So we will start with priority number 6. And again, just a reminder, so here you have the strategies for priority number 6, and I am in my notes going to go straight to that one. And the red at the bottom, while I am looking for priority number 6, you see the note. You see the note here. So essentially the comment or the edit question that is asked of priority number 6 is step 1 is listed here is part of doing number 2. So step 1 is part of doing number 2. Let me use the right. Strategy 1 is a part of doing strategy number 2. And strategy number 1 should be repeated frequently as an ongoing management of the communications plan, not a one-time effort. Listing strategy 1 separately seems redundant. So, and this is kind of the format I think we're going to take throughout, if it's okay with you. Our interpretation of this was that strategy number 1 was so very important that it needed to be listed, and that is why it is listed here. We do understand this comment to be saying that in the implementation plan, it should occur both short-term. It should be occurring short-term, medium, and long-term. So over and over again. So I just want to make sure if I'm understanding that correctly. And okay, so.
Yeah, you are. So, I mean, anybody that knows anything about marketing and branding strategy, from our perspective, was the data is the most important thing. There's no way to start a branding campaign, a marketing, new messaging, new hashtags, anything until we get the data. So the first strategy was key, and we were looking at it in 3 distinct areas as the participants, the seekers, the people who are already there, already buying tickets, already giving their money, understanding their attitudes, really wanting more information about the people who aren't currently participating. And then also at the same time looking at being able to pull those key statements and information about what is the perceived state of culture, for the actual people. So to get to 2, you have to do 1 first, but then once you start doing 2, you'll constantly be continuing qualitative research to make sure that the branding and the strategies that you put into place are actually working. So I don't agree that it's redundant. I think that 1 does become part of 2, but 1 has to happen first. Yeah. Was our thought.
I think the only thing that I would say is that on 1, if you added what you just said, Joy, which is conduct qualitative and quantitative market research in Charlotte-Mecklenburg yeah, sorry. I would just add at the end of that, market research in Charlotte-Mecklenburg in the short, medium, and long term with frequency to understand, and then that follows. Because then you've got what you want. It's going to be an ongoing process to ensure that we actually know if everything we've planned here is actually working in some way.
Does that work for? Okay.
Does that work for the group? Yep. Anyone have anyone have heartburn with adding those phrases? Yeah.
I have no comments around the text or what's said. I just had a question around the Charlotte Regional Visitor Authority. So if you want to keep going with it, my question is just, we mention organizations, that this seems like a key component since they're mentioned in the strategy priority. I was curious if the task force has talked to the
No.
CRVA?
This is just our belief as a task force of where it should live.
Oh, you're saying it should live at,
Or that, maybe not live there, but they have to be contributing significantly in this if we're looking at arts and culture being an economic driver in this city, that they have to have a strong presence in that, the actual communication out, using all the channels that they currently have, and that they have to be committed to the messaging that's developed. So no, we were told to put down, like, what is the best case scenario, and that is the best case scenario.
got it. Okay, thank you.
And I'll just note that Tom Murray is part of the steering group, so has also received the different
But I guess,
communications.
the only point I'm making is just having buy-in from folks that were putting their name on stuff,
Yeah.
that's all. So I know it's early, but not early, but that is just a comment, to have buy-in.
Okay.
Hang on a sec. I really don't want to get nitpicky, but I think Charles brings up a good point. I mean, I know that we need to ask for what we want, and that Tom on a list has been a member of this body, but we also don't want to be perceived as calling them out. I'm just wondering if not naming a specific organization, but it is in the implementation plan, right? I'm wondering if living in the implementation plan is where CRVA should be, and maybe not called out as a strategy, and they find out tomorrow at the same time as everyone else. April, I'm with you. We got to ask for what we want, but these guys are such a key partner that I don't want to give them a reason to not
That's fine.
jump into this.
Or could you word it as an example, such as the Charlotte Regional?
Or, yeah,
It
just
could
say
just be-
regional stakeholders or in conjunction with partners.
Okay.
I like that.
But to name them in the implementation, absolutely, that they are critical. And they are named in the implementation, are they not? As one of the leaders, so.
So, in conjunction with regional partners.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we thought, I think you're onto something.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay.
You read my mind.
One conversation, it's all good.
So I've made those edits. Joy, if we could just maybe take a moment for people to give a quick look back at what's on the screen here. We've made those 2 edits. Just want to make sure folks are good with it before we move on.
Thumbs up. Okay, I see
I'm
from
sorry,
Charles.
right quick.
When we get to implementation, they have potential partners. They only have the Arts and Culture Board and the CRVA, and I think there are Center City partners. I think there's a whole bunch of folks.
I do too. So
I
that's,
think we
can add that when we get
can
to the
fatten
implementation.
that.
Yes. Yes. Okay, excellent.
So I have something really nitpicky. We substituted in the word participants where we had seekers, which I think is a good fix. I don't think we need the quotation marks anymore. It feels a little bit like, what are we really saying? And if we just took the quotation marks out, I think.
Awesome.
Good? Everyone good?
So we have unanimous consent on this?
Thumbs up. Everybody good?
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right.
If you disagree, just, shove your table over and leave the room, and we'll know.
All right.
Please don't do that. Where are we going next, Joy?
We're going back to priority 1, and you can delete the red, maybe.
Yeah, because this is.
Yep, it's taken care of. And I put a check mark so we Thank you so much, April. Appreciate it.
Thanks, April.
All right, so priority number 1. In the red, just to remind you again, in the red is the comment that we received. And on this one, we thought this was a, in fact, the commenter actually said this is tiny. But in strategy 1, we use quote unquote ongoing twice in the same sentence. That might be intentional, but I thought I'd call it out anyway. We are suggesting that we remove the second mention of ongoing, which you see here and highlighted. That's the only suggested change that we had, and the rest of the strategies.
There were no edits.
Yeah, exactly.
There were no suggested
My
edits.
co-chair isn't here, but we're fine with this.
Yes.
I would just question, why are we striking the second ongoing versus the first ongoing?
That's interesting.
I can answer why we're suggesting striking the second one, but it doesn't have to be the second one, but I'll just share what our thinking was.
Yes, exactly.
Which is just that because in the phrase after primarily, it says annual, so it does give a time frame. That's why we thought, well, let's leave annual where it is and keep the ongoing that appears earlier. But again, whatever the group is comfortable with, that was our rationale.
Well, what if you change ongoing to just annual? Because ongoing is an annual to me. I mean, annual is every year. It's ongoing.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's what, yes.
Oh, so it would say secure significant annual public support. I mean, you wanted to.
Because we're talking about annual budgets, correct?
Right.
I mean, this is what we're talking about. It's the annual budget versus ongoing.
Okay, so what you're suggesting is we would say secure significant annual public sector support, primarily ongoing support? I mean.
Yeah, it's just take everything else.
Yeah, primarily support from the city and the county with supplemental blah, blah, blah. I think that's okay. It's okay with me anyway.
Okay.
So you put annual up here in the first place and take.
So Priya, what they're saying is.
Replace the first ongoing with annual and delete the later. Okay.
And then delete both the second ongoing and the annual support.
I'm just reading it to see if I feel like we lose anything if we do that.
I know.
I'm just going to throw something out.
Ongoing annual support.
Yeah.
So say that again.
I might say ongoing annual public sector support from the city and county.
Dash primarily support from the city.
Yeah.
Doesn't really define a period of time. I think annual makes more sense.
I'm not saying one or the other. I was just saying both. Ongoing annual support forever.
So it's for clarity. I think.
Could say forever.
Now there is a such thing as strangling on that, so we don't want to do that. So what are we saying now? Secure. I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay. What do we want to say?
Well,
I agree with that.
are we trying to get at something around consistency, or, because I think one thing about annual is, I mean, I know we do say significant, so that implies an amount. But I think what we also potentially want to see is that there is some predictability to it, that it's not grossly fluctuating from one year to the next. So annual could be, that doesn't have anything to do with consistency of support. So maybe there's room there for
Meg,
that.
Maybe you put
I can tell you.
consistent after primarily.
I can tell you why we didn't use the word, we had a pretty robust discussion around the word predictable, because predictable could also be perceived as flat. So if you're like, every year it's gonna be 2%, yay, hey, predict that. We want it to grow over time, and you'll see in the implementation, it's that we want that give to be commensurate with the economic growth of the city and the county. So we don't want to say, okay, great, it's 1%, get ready for that every year, whatever it's going to be. The discussion was around, we hope it keeps pace with the growth of the city, and if as we get a jump, then the art spending has a jump. That may not be a perfect way to address it, but that is why we talked around not using the word predictable.
Yeah, I think that's also why I recall the group also talked about potentially using reliable and moved away from it for the same reason.
So Tim, just speaking, if you're speaking for that group, what is the most comfortable or true wording that you think makes sense here?
Yeah.
In our perfect world, it'd say something about growth over time.
And it does say, it says it in the action steps.
In the action implementation.
Yeah.
So how do we want this to read? Anybody else?
Yeah.
Charles, why don't you say what you had?
I just said ongoing annual.
Well, no, read the whole.
You got to say the whole thing.
Start from the word secure.
Secures significant ongoing annual public support primarily from the city and county with supplemental support from state, regional, and national sources.
There we go.
So you got that?
Yes, that's good, Charles, yeah.
Is this what you said, Charles?
So it should say, secure significant ongoing annual public sector support primarily from the city and county with supplemental support from the state, regional, and national sources.
Perfect.
Okay?
Are folks good with that?
Thumbs up? Yeah?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just got one thing. When we talk about grow over time, which I think is really important, should that growth part be in there, secure, ongoing, annual public sector support that grows over time? I mean, or there's something that grows with the population or, I mean.
It reflects the growth of the city?
Or Charlotte-Mecklenburg, I mean, I'm just. Go ahead.
Go, Tim.
I apologize for my zeal. I think
Is your mic on?
came up with this in the.
Wait, can you take your mic? I can't hear you.
Sorry. Oh, excuse me. Oh, Charlotte. Oh, Charlotte. Got that one on time. Good job, Minor. I think what we came up with in the group, and I am apologizing for jumping in on Krista, is we said ongoing, in the strategy, it says ongoing support for and increasing engagement for the arts that reflects community and economic growth. So if we want to add that to the end, to add that growth factor, Krista, does that get to what you were trying to say? It's on the implementation outcome number 3. Strategy, priority 1.
Yeah,
strategy.
I just think something about growth, because when you say ongoing annual, that reflects back to what we talked about, predictable. I mean, ongoing annual, they may say, okay, it's going to be flat, but when you talk about growth, I think having that word is growth, so that's fine.
To a strategy.
That language,
Did you write those words down?
let me see.
Strategy number 3.
I just have my
That-
one, I
no,
just have
those
my
are
one
in the-
caution.
Those are in the implementation.
I just have my one caution. The city's budget does not grow in any pace that's close to how the city grows.
That's true.
And so that's a challenge that we have today we have way more people than we have resources for. And so that's just my thing to keep in mind, that those do not grow even close to in the same proportion.
Can't be they grow, well.
I think
Yeah,
that's
but
also.
it could be difficult in practice.
Yeah, I think that's why we put it in the outcomes.
Okay.
In the maybe. I'm just going back to my memory.
Yeah.
I think that's why we put it in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so hearing that, does that work? Because it actually does appear in the outcomes. So, okay, so if we've got the thumbs up on 1, what about we just take them as a basket now? 1, 2, 3, and 4. Are there any thoughts or any? Feels good? Okay, thumbs up, good, okay. So priority 1 is done, so we've got 1 and 6, let's go to 2.
But hold on, I'm just saving.
Okay.
I think it's,
Is it auto-saving?
it's SharePoint.
Yes, it's auto-save. So priority number 2, when you get to priority number 2, what do you notice? No red. Exciting, exciting. So on this priority, the strategies were unanimously confirmed. So we want to just make sure in this room they're unanimously confirmed. The thumbs up on those strategies for priority number 2.
Question to your right.
So
I'm so
Joy,
sorry,
yeah,
right there.
Meg, your thing, I think you were going to mention, Joy, that Meg, you had a suggestion about adding something to this, which we were going to come back to, right, Joy?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh,
You
yeah.
are correct. You are correct. You know what? We removed the note, and then I just acted on the removal, so you're right.
So I think we wanted to confirm these 2 statements, and Meg, your suggestion was to move a strategy from priority 5 to priority 2, which is what we pasted into another slide. Is that?
So we are going to discuss that in 5, with 5, because it would, if we accept these 2, it would simply add 1. We had to do some math on it. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. Yes.
So just to clarify, right, Joy, first we're asking folks, because we received no suggested edits, we just want to confirm with the group on these strategy statements for 2. Are folks good with 2? We are then going to come back to the suggestion. There's a suggestion that relates to priority 5 and priority 2. So we'll come back to that. But in the interim, we wanted to confirm whether folks are good with these 2 strategy statements.
I'm good with the strategy statement. I'm curious about, and maybe we did this, we probably talked about this, sorry. But the priority 2 statement, like the public sector must partner, can someone just remind me of, like, I guess the way I read this was almost as if the public sector is not partnering. But if it's just me, I'm...
So let me explain that real quickly, and my co-chair is not here, but David's here. The thought was we wanted to make a very strong statement that in order for us to be successful, the public sector must be a part of this game and not rely on the private sector to carry the load. And to be specific to your statement, there have been ebbs and flows with the public sector support. So what we're trying to do is make a very strong statement that in order for us to be successful, we have to have public sector support. And that was the best word we came up with. Did I explain that right, David?
I'd say so. Yeah.
Julie, would you say, like, as a former member of the public sector or public sector body, what are your thoughts on how this?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I think in a lot of what we looked at, we recognize that we're not even counting all of the private sector that does step up. But the public sector's got to make a commitment.
All right, I'm good.
I think one of the things that drove that, Charles, is we looked back at some old numbers from when we did the potential for a tax to support the arts, and at that time, best we could count, which didn't count near all of it, there was about $42 million in private sector funding annually, which made what city and county were doing look like.
Wow, you said annually?
Annually. Yeah. So it was a big number.
So may I know.
That wasn't just corporate, it was family foundations, corporate and individual giving to arts organizations.
So that's interesting because that leads to another comment that I had in reading the whole report was we don't ever share the percentages from the different groups that support the sector, from individual donors to corporations to public. And so I was like, because in the opening statement or somewhere in the early one, I was like, man, this would be great if we had a chart that showed. So then that would.
And we have asked for that.
Yeah.
We agree 100%.
And we provided, so we have a chart that was in the State of Culture report. Exactly. It's not in the draft plan.
I just wondered if that would help
yeah.
us to understand like.
So let's do this. We agree it needs to be there. Do we have consensus on priority 2?
Thumbs up, everybody's okay? with
Great.
priority two? Great.
Can I just add one quick comment to Charles' point? I think when the presentation's made to council, that needs to come out.
Absolutely.
They don't know it. They're gonna go, well, what is the private sector doing?
That was how I was reading it. It was not
Right.
that I disagreed with it.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm reading this as if someone like CNCRVA, like, oh, I've never even heard of this. Like, what are you talking about? Like, why are you mentioning my name? You know, so.
Yes.
Agree 100%, 100%.
Yes, yes. Yes.
The number. Only if you turn your mic on.
You have to press the button. Oh, it's on green. You're on. We can hear you.
You're
We
a
can hear
theater
you.
guy,
Yeah.
Carlos. You can project.
I just had the second strategy there, when it talks about delivery of equitable and accessible funding, it refers to as an ongoing thing, which sounds a little bit vague to me into like, how does that happen constantly? There is not like, and because we're talking about something as sensitive as equity, access, inclusive stuff, you know, if we put a little bit more, something that feels more, that we can count on, I think it will reflect the directiveness of it personally. But I'm not sure, you know, not native English speaker here, I'm not sure what word it would mean, but we had that conversation about ongoing versus annual, and then that strikes me as something that needs a little, we could benefit of having a little more clarity of what we mean about that.
I have a question, because I think that's a great point of feedback. And we are going to get to this in a little bit, but if you may have seen in the, hopefully you saw in the implementation plan that we linked specifically strategy 2 of this priority in the implementation plan directly to the entirety of priority. I'm pointing over here because some of priority 5 is over, task force is over here. So we linked it in the implementation plan to priority 5 because, and I remember that when we had a conversation with task force 5, we were talking about the linkages and synergies between
It's number 42, page 42 of this document
of the
here.
implementation. Thank you. And so so that's where we used some text and an icon to direct the reader that priority 5 relates really closely to this strategy. I don't know if that works or if essentially we need to kind of enhance that and even note it in the language of the strategy, like see priority 5. And if linking those in that way provides that kind of specificity that would help with what you're saying, Carlos Alexis.
It actually does that in this.
Yes, it does it in the implementation plan, and I'm just realizing maybe we need to do it.
Maybe we should put some explicit, like see priority 5 here, because it really, I mean, you're 100% correct. We totally agree, and had good conversations around that. So,
and I just want to add too that the reason, and so Kevin, I hope I'm not overstepping. You can explain this, more. I'm recalling that Task Force 2 also talked about the linkages between Priority 5 and Priority 2, and that task force. I'm looking at David as well, since you were in the task force. That the task force specifically, they wanted to that you all added those words to try to strengthen the link to Priority 5. That's my recollection of one of the last Task Force 2 conversations. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
So maybe the answer here, just in the interest of kind of, and I don't want to so in the interest of kind of thinking about this moving forward, maybe we say here, see Priority 5 as noted, because we really do the linking piece here. In the implementation planning, and as well as, does that work?
Yeah, I think that will bring, that ensures that there's more attention given to this as well, which
perfect.
Is important. I think how quantifiable, is important to see further, but I think in the meantime, I personally feel that would work.
Okay.
I'll just say quickly, Carl, I think you bring up a great point, because folks reading this, they don't see what they want right off the bat, or they get confused, they may give up. showing that these are not 8 priorities in a vacuum, but that they interrelate, might keep them, might sell more the conversation that we've had, how these things relate to one another, and pull people through the documents. That's a really good suggestion.
Awesome.
David, you okay with that addition? Anybody else on the task force here?
Okay, so are we thumbs up on it now with that addition?
Good.
Thumbs up.
Yeah?
Awesome. All right.
Move forward.
Perfect. Priority number 3. Okay, so on priority number 3, the comment from was essentially, I wonder if higher education, like UNC Charlotte as an example, might also be partners in creating affordable spaces. Maybe that's something to add deeper in the strategic document and not at this level. So that was the full comment. We thought this made perfect sense and have suggested some places where higher education can be added. So, number 1, want to make sure with the priority 3 group that these suggested additions make sense, and then with the broader group, if they also make sense. So, seeing here in strategy 1, where it is added with partner with city, county, private industry / higher education to do the listed items. And then number 2, partner with developers, corporations, and higher education institutions to intentionally build and incorporate multidisciplinary, so on and so forth. So
Joy, we don't have our,
I was like,
our priority 3.
what is happening?
Folks aren't here. However, these are fairly, oh, you are? Yes, you are. I'm so sorry. Okay, it's all on you, Doug.
I know.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a good ad.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's a good ad. I don't think we had that representation inside our group, and it didn't come up. We were
Excellent.
specifically because we were specifically looking on public, right? We weren't looking at the higher institutions in any way, shape, or form.
That makes sense.
Awesome. Okay, other thoughts? Dr. Woods?
I see later in priority 3 where you mention churches, et cetera, prioritize local artists, access, affordability to city, county-owned buildings, arts and non-traditional art space, and you got libraries, schools, parks, and churches. I think you're missing an opportunity by not being more intentional about art in religious spaces.
In what spaces?
In religious spaces. I think you're missing an opportunity there.
Throughout the entire?
Throughout, yeah. Whether it's an existing space, and one of the fastest things going now for churches that have gotten into the development game, where they're building common space as a part of that development around affordable housing. You see more of that stuff for seniors, getting to them early about if you're going to do this, what would it look like to ensure that there are opportunities for space related to art, whether they're doing family life centers.
I think you're right on target there. How would you change the wording?
Would you add a fourth strategy around churches?
I think you can include it actually within number 2. So you're partnering with developers and corporations and higher education institutions and
houses of worship.
Yeah, and houses of faith, or however you want to however you want to phase that. The point is that you're not just thinking about them around the existing space that they have.
Right.
You're thinking about them about the new space they're about to create.
To that end, and that's an excellent point, Dr. Woods, I would say we probably need to throw public in there too, because the city and the county build structures all the time. So to that end, we want that. It'd probably be a good idea to factor that into new construction, but public spaces as well.
Here's a question. So all of these are great points, and as I'm thinking about as we are adding more folks, 2 things. One, does the list kind of start to get long, and at the same time, does it leave folks out that we don't mean to leave out? So what I wonder is, does it make sense to, in fact, broaden it to say public and private property owners?
I think you have to be specific. I do.
I do too.
I think you have to be specific because the reason you need to be is that we're talking about being intentional about naming groups that have been left out. that have not been thought about. To say private and public property owners is too generic. I think it needs to be intentional and specific as particularly since we're listing this as a strategy.
What phrase did go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in our group, Priority 5, was about the geographic inequity and how big swaths of the city does not have access. And I understand that it's addressed in some of the implementation, but I don't see that reflected in any of those 3 priorities. And you can correct me if I'm missing something. The need to address, the geographic inequity and.
Well, I think if you start to look at the city and the county, city and county have properties all over the geographic area. So, I think it was not an intentional kind of choice to try to center it in one location. Right. It was trying to be as broad as we possibly could, with keeping that private industry, city and county, to create those opportunities for the affordable space.
No, I'm also bringing it up is because when it came up in our group, I think our consensus was that that'll be addressed in priority 3. So I don't think we are going too much into the geographic access thing, right, Charles? With the assumption that it'll be living here.
I was just going to say, one thing that may help is that priority 4 gets a bit into geographic access. I'm looking at Task Force 4 co-chairs here. So it might be that that's a place that the geography shows up.
I think that was intentional too, because there was confusion at one point in time around that this one specifically is about the availability of space.
Right.
I'm super cognizant in this availability of space, and the second one was more geographic, like where you can reach the space.
Yeah, strategy 2 in priority 4 does mention that, so good. Thank you. Yeah, I remember seeing it somewhere. I just thought it was here.
So you're good, Manoj,
I'm good.
on geography?
Good for now.
Okay, cool. Did you have something? No. Okay. Okay, so wait, I just want to, did we come back to we're inserting a phrase into strategy 2 that is houses of what does the group think would be the
Yeah, I said houses of faith.
Houses of faith.
Or
faith
what about
community.
faith organizations or faith communities or?
I like the faith community personally.
Because it could be much broader than thinking of a church. It could be
Which means in number 3, you've got to take church out as well.
It could be a mosque.
Yes, that would change the faith community.
Cindy, you're saying remove churches from here?
Not remove it, but change it.
Change it
Change it to faith community.
Or houses of faith.
Houses of faith.
Houses, okay. Okay, so with that those changes, are we feeling comfortable with 1, 2, and 3 strategies of priority number 3?
Thumbs up. Oh, wait, we've got.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a question, but can I ask a question?
I have no idea. I never care if someone asks a question. I don't.
Ask a question, please.
Yeah.
I just have a question about prioritizing local artist access and affordability. The third one, it feels, for me reading it, are we purposely excluding traditional art spaces from that? And I think it makes total sense to specify non-traditional art spaces and public art, but to me it reads like we're not prioritizing local artist access and affordability to existing traditional art spaces.
That would be considered under, because prioritize local artists' access and affordability to city, county-owned public art and non-traditional art spaces. So that was really, the owns part, because if you're looking at any of the performing arts centers, whether it's Bojangles Coliseum, or it's the Night Theater, those are either city or county owned. So that was the intent of that.
But to the point, to Robin's point, does the public really know that? I wonder if we know that, but do people really understand that those traditional buildings are owned by the public sector? Is it worth pointing out?
We can always make a footnote.
It might also make sense just to delete, like,
So
what
that's
if it
why
just
the
said
point's valid.
spaces?
Public art as like the public art.
Right. Yeah.
That's what, so here's an idea. This is a good idea, Priya, what you were just about to say. If you,
Which
well,
is
I
to
don't know if
say,
it's a good idea,
just to
but-
say spaces, so there, where I've highlighted, because I think that might get to your question, Robin, which is, where that way, we're not unintentionally leaving out spaces that are already art spaces that still, I think the group is saying should be prioritized for local artist access.
Yeah.
How does the group feel about
So change the
that?
word public art to what?
Spaces.
Spaces.
Spaces are facilities.
Yeah, spaces, you might say facilities slash spaces or spaces slash facilities.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that it does need to be clear, though, that we are talking about both traditional arts spaces
Yes.
like theaters and concert halls or whatever, and non-traditional arts spaces
Correct.
like libraries, schools, parks, et cetera.
Churches.
I think that needs to be really clear. And so so maybe we say prioritize local artist access and affordability to city-owned arts spaces and non-traditional
Spaces.
arts, or city-owned traditional and non-traditional arts spaces, or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
How
Okay.
about that?
Okay.
City, county-owned traditional
Traditional.
and non-traditional arts spaces.
So let me,
Not a footnote. I got you.
wait, hold on one second, because if you say non-traditional, and then you put a qualifier, art spaces,
Yeah, I don't think you need art in there.
that takes away
The arts and-
non-traditional, because then it's an art
It's
space.
non-traditional space. A
Yeah.
library is not normally an art space.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I
my-
see what you mean.
The reason that we were just going to put a footnote was because the truth here is that the city and county-owned spaces are the traditional spaces, just as Doug clarified. So if we put a footnote here to make sure that everyone knows it, as Julie has noted, then we won't confront the issue of then having to further define non-traditional art spaces, which is these libraries, schools, because those are not where we would traditionally encounter.
I know, but what I'm saying is that you don't need the word art under
Right.
non-traditional.
It's non-traditional spaces.
Spaces.
For arts, okay.
No, it's non-traditional space, the whole,
No, I understand what you're
okay.
saying. My brain just hit for arts. Okay, gotcha.
So, and one more.
Hold on. Chris, I couldn't think of your name. Krista had a question, she had her hand up when I rudely interrupted her already, so go ahead.
Well, I was wondering, just like you had the things in parentheses like libraries, schools, I was wondering, before it was changed to traditional, that you have space, either facilities, parentheses, museums, theaters, et cetera, so that you have an example of what public
Traditional.
spaces are, and then you already have examples of the non-traditional spaces. I think that just makes it cleaner, so people say, oh, well, what do they mean by spaces? Well, you got
Yeah, that's a good idea.
museums,
That's a good
theaters.
idea, yeah.
Also to add, I think it's a great idea too. Also to add to that, so there are, I know a lot of the major institutions are in city-owned spaces, but then there are also a few which are city-county funded but not owned, right? So shouldn't also be city-county owned and funded, and/or funded?
What's an example of that?
Yeah. Of the funded one. Yeah, what do
So, I mean, do all the major, let's say the big 12 institutions in Uptown, are they all in city or county-owned spaces, or?
No.
So, but they all get major funding from the city and county. So are we talking just specifically only about the
Well,
city-owned spaces?
It's a good question, but I guess I would maybe a reason there is a distinction is because the ones that aren't the ones that are city and county owned facilities,
Right.
those, there's a very different financial burden
Right.
between those and the ones that own their own spaces, even if they receive public funding. Does that make sense?
True, yes.
So in a sense, there's potentially a different mandate, I think, is what we've heard people talk about.
Different expectation of
Right,
what their obligation to the
the
city
facility
is.
itself is owned by a public
Okay,
entity.
no, that makes sense.
I think, just so I'm clear, I believe the last comment was, it would be city, county-owned traditional arts facilities, or traditional facilities, whether we put in arts or not, and then non-traditional delete art spaces.
Right.
Yes.
Just spaces.
I think if you're, I do think we probably need arts in front of, after traditional, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense.
You're agreeing,
Yeah.
totally.
Right.
Okay, so in reading this, Krista, is your hand up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, could you remove performing arts and put theaters, just so that people will know it's museums, theaters, et cetera?
That's it. That's what they own, right?
Yes.
Correct.
The building.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
And the Coliseum.
Great.
That's point number 3, not 1.
They own the brick and mortar.
Okay, does this look good to folks with
That
this
is-
edit?
That's number 3. It's gonna be number 3. And then, but other than that, yeah.
I've got a quick question. It has nothing to do with changing any wording.
Well, wait, because we're running out of time. You wanna?
I'm trying to do it for, so maybe solve some of this for the future, like some of this going back and forth. How is this, like, can we, rather than trying to get every single thing in the priorities, when we have an implementation structure that shows the partners we want, can further explain these things, as this is presented to the public, like, if I'm going through the survey, can I click on, can we put something where people can click down into the
We sure can.
the implementation so that they can read more and
Not-
have a prompt?
We're
Well,
not,
no, I mean,
no, we're
sorry,
not
I'm saying
sharing
we
the
sure can't.
implementation plan right now, so we can't.
No, we cannot. So let's go ahead and go through
Footnote,
this.
the footnote is
The
what would
footnote
do
is
that.
helpful, I'm sorry, you're right. So the footnote is helpful, that's why I was going with the footnote version. I understand what you're saying is not to include every word in it. It does seem like this group is erring on the side of clarity, so we appreciate that. And let's go ahead and move on. If everybody is good with this
3.
priority 3,
Let's do
let's
3.
do it, okay?
Are we okay on 3?
Everybody okay? Okay, so let's now go to 6. We got 6.
Done
Let's go to
6.
7.
Yeah.
We've done 6, let's go to 7. So with 7, priority 7, we have the 2 comments here. So the 2 comments, okay, so I think this is the one where we wanted the clarity, okay, on the word sectors is vague, as with priority number 4, that's about a comment regarding priority number 4. Without some description or explanation, it's hard to know what that means. Could we identify the sectors or give examples? This speaks to what Tim is just noting for earlier. And then the second bullet, in strategy number 2, the word sector is singular rather than plural, singular rather than plural. So does that mean across the cultural sector, or is that an error and it means between the cultural sector and other sectors? So in this space, wanted to ask Carlos Alexis your thoughts, but also because we had suggestions of just a question really around that first piece, which is in the first strategy, incentivize and enable cross-sector collaborations through funding and technical support. In looking at the actions in the implementation plan, it looks like the first strategy is across sectors from cultural sector and other sectors, so across, so corporations, community groups, professional organizations, individual artists, all the tech industry, all of the sectors, across sectors, and that the second strategy is amongst the arts and culture sector. So we thought that number 2 could benefit just from adding in possibly arts and culture sector, across
Joy,
the arts and culture.
sorry, Joy, are you looking at strategy 1 or strategy 2 right now in the which page of the implementation plan are you looking at?
In
The action
page,
steps.
I was looking at my notes, but on page 57.
Just wanted to make sure I was looking at the right action steps. So basically, we wanted to ask
We're asking.
Priority Set Task Force 7 for some just clarity around what your
Shefali,
thoughts were. Yes.
I'm looking straight at you, and that's why I'm sorry. Yes, you as well, you're here, yes. So page number 57.
Okay.
So in strategy 1, when you read the actions, it appears that those are cross sectors, like not just amongst the arts and culture sector. And then strategy 2 appears to be amongst the arts and culture sector.
Yeah, that's, it feels like it was like 2 years ago that we wrote this. Your assumption is correct. I mean, we were talking about, if I remember correctly, the conversation in the first one, we were talking originally about the cultural sector, but then we said there are possibilities of collaboration that will further funding, possibilities and resources for projects and things and initiatives. That in the first one is not necessarily, just the artistic, cultural sector, but in the second one, we're talking about how do we enhance possibilities for, resources and funding structures within the artistic sector. So whatever, in whichever way we can make that more clear.
Make it clear. I would think de-incentivize and enable varying sector collaborations, if that works, like varying meaning like people in different sectors. That was our intention. And the second one, I would, add an S would probably be the easier solution. It was just collaboration across the different sectors.
Make a suggestion that we keep the language consistent and just use creative ecosystem in the second strategy. So build capacity for collaboration across the creative ecosystem. So that the word sector means broader, and then ecosystem means cultural and arts sector.
That could, that sounds good.
Great work.
How does that work, Carlos Alexis, or does? You're not, I don't know if that, I know I see you processing it.
Oh, you just saw it, like.
Yeah, you're.
No, I wonder, is the longer conversation between like how to also make sure that the artistic community is taken care of in this process. And, the arts translate into many things, but I want to make sure that the artistic community is like, it's prioritized. So I would say more, I don't know. That's what I was thinking. But I agree, I'm okay with the wording there.
Okay.
In the first one, do we want to change that to enable cross-sector collaborations or varying sector? It was meant to be, we wanted to include, we just want people with the same background, with different backgrounds to connect.
I feel like it would be helpful even, and I don't think we need to get into a long list necessarily. I know we're trying not to add a long list, but, there is strength in proposing, as we look out in the future, that there would be collaboration between the arts sector and the healthcare sector, and between the arts sector and the energy sector, or the transportation. I mean, there's a lot, right? So we don't want to list 25 different sectors, but I think something that demonstrates when you come across this priority without any substantiating definitions, explanations, or descriptions, because you're just going to see this if you're Joe Public, that there is something that suggests what those sectors might be. That just clarifies that,
I think. I wonder, I agree, I think the term sector might not be as clear in general. Like in academia, we will be talking about cross-disciplinary, research and stuff like that. We're talking about fields, professional fields, like, I'm curious of what it actually, what kind of language word down there can serve that purpose.
Would it be, would it be bad to say incentivize and enable across professional fields, as you just said? Is that too simple to, because that does get away from the jargony language?
What if you said cross-sector collaboration between the arts and culture sector and other sectors? And that clarifies that it's meant to be outside of the creative ecosystem with whatever other sectors are out there in the community.
Going to make the suggestion that we potentially swap sectors for industries to potentially speak towards other ways that people make a living, and that collaboration being funded via technical support for people to figure out how those things cross over.
That could be another word. Yeah, because I mean, our main goal is to incentivize, right? And in one way we can't, but I don't know how we can quantify it, but to understand, like, did I really help another group, or like you said, with healthcare or energy or transportation?
My only concern is that industry really sounds like industry. And so, for instance, what if you have arts organizations partnering with a social service, organization, or with an environmental organization?
Right, but are you saying to put that parenthesis in, and we're trying to, I guess, reduce?
I mean, I don't know if there's a word that encompasses the full range of other fields, organizations, whatever, but something that might, somewhere on the slide, demonstrate the potential for that.
Every turn, we can break it down.
Yeah, you've been.
Because professional fields, and I talk about, but what are we defining professional? There are other fields that are not, or fields of service, but you know what I'm saying, like, I don't know.
What?
Fields and disciplines. Fields and disciplines.
What if we leave cross-sector there, put a parentheses, name 3 of them, and then do, dot, et cetera, something like that?
Like such as education, health, and social service.
Exactly.
Right.
There you go.
It's
That's what I'm saying.
That works.
Or,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that
But
make
just
sense to
noting-
everybody?
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah,
could work.
that look on your face.
No, I think that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
I think we need to just clarify what we mean by cross-sector clarification.
Does that clarify it, though?
Well, yeah, I think if you say arts and culture sector and other sectors such as, education,
Okay.
health services, then you've got.
Also, and I just wanted, I'm sorry, this is taking I just want to make doubly sure though before we leave this one that, because as I look at this actions under this strategy, to me they sound like they include fostering collaborations within the arts and culture sector. So I just am checking with our task force co-chairs about that to make sure we're not, unintentionally focusing on things that are between arts and culture and other sectors when the actions under them might be meant to include things happening within arts and culture, kind of based on what you're saying, Carlos Alexis, about wanting to make sure that the arts community is specifically taken care of within those collaborations. So I don't know if, I just want to ask about that before we move away from
Maybe it's
this one.
arts and culture as well as.
Or maybe it's something like incentivize and enable collaborations within arts and culture, and within arts and culture,
And other sectors.
like within the
and then
creative
that
ecosystem,
With all other
and
sectors.
across, and with other fields and disciplines. I don't know if that
Can you repeat
is
that?
too much.
That's a lot.
Something like, so incentivize and enable collaborations within the creative
Within the creative
ecosystem and with other fields and disciplines.
sectors of the
Or other sectors, or other sectors such, in parentheses, such as education, health, and social service, something like that.
Go ahead and type that out.
So in real life, Priya, that is what the priority says.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
I guess this this strategy is like a more detailed version of the priority statement, it sounds like, right?
Well, because it's got incentivize and enable, so,
And
and
it-
then the actions.
And it directly addresses that cross-sector, whereas the second one directly addresses
The
collaboration
creative
within
among the.
Yeah, I agree about the strategy statements doing that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, as I look at the action statement, the action steps under one aren't just about, they really sound like they have a lot to do with within arts and culture.
Okay, so if you can write what you did, what you said, and then we'll see what first 7 chairs and then group. Yeah. That is so weird, isn't it? It writes so small.
I'll make it larger in a moment. I just didn't want to.
No, it's fine. I know what you're doing, yeah. Yeah, what's another word, like industries or, because, yeah, like it could be like art and medical, art and energy, art and everybody.
According to the Charlotte Regional Leadership, whatever their name is, the largest employers per industry is advanced manufacturing, financial services, logistics, distribution, life science, health, innovation, economy. Those are the sectors that they list.
The CRBA.
The CRBA.
Yeah.
No, it's not the CRBA, is it?
Yeah.
It's the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance.
Oh, CRBA, yes.
All right,
yes.
that's what I was getting mixed up.
Business Alliance.
Also,
CRBA.
as well as health.
I know, Charlotte.
Okay, so everyone, just focusing on what's red here now, right up under 1. Healthcare, such as healthcare. Good job, Preeta.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Are we okay with this?
Put an S on service.
Service. Put an
Social
S on
services.
There you go.
Feeling good? Everybody thumbs up? Carlos, Chef Ali.
I think Carlos is like an absence of a thumbs down. It's not quite a thumbs up, but.
I always say yes, but is there a comma after ecosystem in there, or is it before the and?
No comma, because it's not a full sentence after the and.
Ooh, go English.
Everybody, yes, yes.
Where did that
Just
come from?
listen, so we're gonna give, you good? 7?
Yeah.
All right, thumbs up, we got it. All right, now to 8, and remember that we're gonna go back to 4 and 5, okay? So 8 is, now on my 8, I don't have any red.
No red.
Yeah.
On my,
We did not
again, the
receive
star
edits.
student is always the gold star. We didn't have any comments on 8. Looking at this priority and the strategies, do we have a thumbs up? Does everyone feel comfortable? I see thumbs up, I see thumbs up, I see thumbs up. Excellent, excellent, okay. So 8 is done. Let's go back to number 4. So with priority number 4,
Oh, you had a lot of red, okay.
yes. So with priority number 4, okay. So we had a comment, or not we received comments. In strategy number 2, there are really 2 points. Now, mind you, this is a statement from someone. It's not necessarily that we're saying, it's just and this will come back as a question for number 4. In number 2, there are really 2 points, cross-cultural and throughout Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Should it be clearer that we want more cross-cultural shared experiences, and we want more availability of cultural experiences throughout the county? So that's the first question. And then both strategies number 1 and okay, I'll just read. But both strategies 2 and 3 seem a little vague without any accompanying description or explanation, it really doesn't convey much. What exactly does it mean to enable cross-cultural shared experiences? So let's stop at those two. Starting with number one, we read this.
Not
read,
number
no.
one.
Sorry, strategy number two. It's bullet number one, I apologize. The bullet number one. The question is actually, we read this and actually had a question, which is, are there really 2 points? Or is this meant to be, as is stated, enable cross-cultural shared experiences throughout Charlotte-Mecklenburg? So I'm going to turn to priority 4 task force leader. Yeah, go ahead.
And in reviewing this particular strategy, it does feel like there is room for further clarity, because it isn't just enabling cross-cultural shared experiences. If you look at the actions that are under this particular strategy, you'll see that this strategy sort of hinges on a few different ideas.
Yes.
One is that demand for participation in arts and culture will increase if the Charlotte-Mecklenburg citizenry really sees himself reflected in the work, if it feels really relevant to them. Two is that increase will then drive up an increase in creative output by the community. These sort of feed each other. And the third is that collaboration is one of the hallmarks, we believe, of a flourishing future creative ecosystem. Experiencing each other's work, supporting each other's work, lifting each other up. So if you really look at our action items, it really is, we're trying to say more than is actually reflected in this particular strategy, which is why I think we should adjust the language of the strategy statement. Because it isn't just about enabling cross-cultural shared experiences. That's a part of it. But it's really, at the heart of it, it's about making sure that the conditions are right so that artists and creatives at all levels can feel encouraged to create and to share their work. So I do have revised language that I would propose for this particular strategy and see if that lands a little more clear and a little better. Foster cross-cultural collaborations, shared artistic experiences. Let me know if I'm going too fast. Foster cross-cultural collaborations, shared artistic experiences, and proliferation of diverse local work throughout Charlotte-Mecklenburg.
Talking about work or art?
Creative work. So yeah, art. Work is meant to capture that, but that we could adjust that. Because we feel like that really sort of gets at the heart of what we're trying to say here, which is that the conditions are right, whereby arts and culture feels relevant to the community. And if you go back to the priority statement, this is all about removing barriers. So yeah, sometimes those barriers are monetary and sometimes it's mobility, but often it's emotional or mental barriers where they don't feel like this work is reflective of them. They don't feel like they're welcome there or what have you. So that's really what we're getting at with this particular statement.
So how do we feel about that highlighted in yellow?
I think we need to swap out proliferation. Yeah. I think it's a little heavy if we're talking about tossing it out to the public to read.
Especially with Oppenheimer out right now.
Got another word?
Oppenheimer, man.
Oh, sorry. Did I?
Well, I would like to, I know this is one of those things that's been so hard to deal with this one because the barriers are real and perceived, right? Which is what Matt is hitting on. I think that's great. Maybe we could also just, I don't know, add a tag that says to deal with real and perceived barriers. Does that make sense? Or to address, to provide access. I don't know. I mean, someone else can wordsmith it better.
So let me make a suggestion real quick here. Let's put a pin in that for a second, but I wrote it down. What do we do with the word proliferation?
Accessibility.
Is there another word? English major?
You know,
And abundance?
I was just
No,
like,
what's a
increase?
positive word?
I don't know.
Abundance.
Yeah, an abundance, yeah.
Abundance.
And
And abundance
An
sounds
abundance
nice.
of.
Yeah, abundance is a lovely word, yeah.
how's that, Kevin?
That was fantastic.
I think I'm missing from here, from your actions, it talks about like is in community. Like it's very specific to different sectors in the community, right? Am I right or am I reading that wrong? And in this strategy now, doesn't point necessarily to the fact of how specific that could be to different neighborhoods and areas within the city.
Was that some of what number 3 is supposed to be?
It's in both 2 and 3, the actions for 2 and 3.
Yeah. So if you look at our actions, like actions number 1 and number 4, and I know they're not on the screen, Carlos, but number 1 and number 4 are really intended to make arts and culture more relevant to the diverse communities of our city and county. And then actions 2 and 3 are meant to sort of further mobilize and share that work, whether that is, you know, literally moving it around with like mobile stages and things like that, or meeting people where they're already on the move, like transit centers and bus stops and things like that.
So it's both.
No, it's, I guess I just saw number 3 over there and then was making the reference to 3 here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're
So you
definitely.
just.
Sorry, I'm confused as
Okay.
to, are we
No, I
on
think he
number?
was-
which one
You're
are we on?
okay now with 2? Okay, yes, he was
2 is
actually,
fine, I think you have to take out that comma, right?
brain was going to 3.
Didn't we want to say local creative work, though?
Yeah,
Not
I
just
think
local
Oh,
work?
change work, you said?
Diverse,
Diverse
local
creative.
creative work.
Add creative after local.
Technically, no, but I will do it because
No,
you
no,
want me
it's
to.
just technically, no, leave it there. I was a math major. I'm not hating.
Local artistic work, creative work, if you feel like we need an additional qualifier there.
Okay.
Creative work.
Creative work.
Okay.
Okay, so actually, we had a point of clarification that the second bullet does pertain to strategy number 3. So let's take the second bullet and the one right below it in concert. So I'll just read it out loud. I believe that creatives and communities is sort of a community artist in residence concept. So that should be more clearly conveyed. Right now, it sounds generic. I mean, all creatives live, work in a community of some sort, so what does this really mean? So the first question here is this strategy talking about an artist, community artist in residence concept? Or if not, clarify.
Yeah, not solely, right? So it's not just about an artist in residency program, although that's great and it should be a part of I think, of the bigger vision here. But it's really about ensuring that the conditions and the resources are right and that they exist all over the community, whereby artists at really at any stage of their career, even those for whom creativity is avocational, maybe not even vocational, but avocational, feel welcome and encouraged and supported to create their work. So really, it is, yes, I think an artist in residency program is a great idea, but it's a part of the broader idea here, which is
That
that.
sounds like an implementation step, though.
An artist in residency program?
Yeah.
I would-
So how do we take number 3? Number 3 we're working on, right?
Yeah.
So number 3,
Yeah, so I have suggested language for number
Go for
3
it.
that
Okay.
gives more clarity as well. You ready, Kriya? Okay. Ensure the conditions and resources exist in neighborhoods throughout Charlotte-Mecklenburg whereby creatives at all levels feel encouraged and supported. Because I feel like that would capture an implementation, action point like an artist in residency program, but it also sort of gets its arms around this idea that everyone feels encouraged and welcomed and supported to create.
okay,
Question.
Krista.
What do you mean by conditions?
I think that it's whether it's that there's financial support, that there's space. I mean, this has been, I have to say that Task Force 4 had a really interesting adventure, right? Because I think unwittingly we found out after the fact that we were sort of surrogate strategists, right? We were birthing and blessing these strategies, and then they went off to their forever homes and inside other priorities. And so what we're left with is our small but very sweet and very, very beautiful little family. So a lot of these conditions that we refer to are kind of actually lived in some of these other strategies that we had written and found homes elsewhere, which is like, that they feel financially supported, that they have access to affordable workspace, that they're, et cetera.
Yeah.
So are we good with number 4?
It would replace number 3, yes.
It would replace number 3.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
I'd make one quick suggestion then. I feel like conditions is a word that can get interpreted a bunch of different ways. If you just say ensure or provide the resources in neighborhoods, that I think resources encapsulates conditions.
Sure.
I agree.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
I'm thinking about the word feel, and maybe swapping it for R. Because I think a lot of times people may not feel like there's an opportunity for them, but it actually does exist and they are supported to a certain degree. So
I get that, man.
Okay.
Is there anything to, I believe this doesn't work, or I don't know, to expand from, communities are, placemaking happen in neighborhoods, but happens in other, adding on communities there or something to expand a little bit from a particular neighborhood.
Right, like communities that are not place-based.
Yeah.
They're not what?
Not place-based, so like,
It's funny,
for
it
example,
originally
a
said
faith community
communities,
could be
yeah.
non-place-based because maybe
I think
people.
you should say both. That's
Yeah,
what-
neighborhoods and
like
communities.
Yeah, just say neighborhoods and communities.
In
Okay.
communities, yeah.
Trapdoor. Yeah, I originally thought the word communities and I swapped it out, but I think both make sense.
Okay, does that look good to everyone?
Yeah.
Great, okay.
Are we there? Thumbs up? Okay.
I forgot one little thing to go back to that you put a pin in for number 2, and that is the access.
That's real and perceived.
That was originally a
I
part.
was just about to say.
That was part of the priority.
It was originally part of our priority statement, and throughout our process, it was removed.
I'm fine with letting it go. I just feel like that's so important.
It was
we did
originally
based
a
on
part, and
fields,
it has
so,
been,
I think that the task force, we removed that in the task force process from the priority statement to.
I just feel like it could go back, but that's fine. I'm not going to die on that hill.
Okay, so we good?
Yeah,
Let's move to the last one, number 5.
The last one, so this is the one, the note. Okay, so in priority number 5, as we have noted, there were a lot, the link between priority number 5 and priority number 2 is inextricable. It's like this, right? So one of the comments that we received specifically on.
Well, so there's one that is not about the linkage, which is about strategy 1.
Yes.
Which is, should we say, they're just suggesting adding a phrase at the beginning of the sentence as part of the new governance process, comma, and the rest of it. Our
Wait, before you
question
go,
for
Charles.
priority 5. Okay. So because they're saying because overseeing without clout, typically money, is a tough way to get success. We have a clarification question for Task Force 5 about this, because we recalled that in Task Force 5 had specified, as you were updating your implementation plan, that there are actually 2 different bodies that you're recommending, and so we revisited the implementation plan and looked at that, and it looked to us like this strategy 1 was actually about that separate body that monitors, not the equity committee that is part of the governance structure. Is that, so we wanted to ask you,
It's a question.
is that correct? Are we interpreting that correctly from what we saw in the task force? In which case, the reason we're asking that is because maybe then this phrase isn't something you'd want to add. the edit that's being suggested is to add that phrase at the beginning of the sentence so that it says, as part of the new governance process, comma, and the rest of the strategy is stated. And then our question is, does that make sense? Because as we read your implementation plan, the strategy 1 isn't actually about the equity committee that you're recommending that's part of the governance process, but it's actually about a separate monitoring organization that wouldn't be part of the governance process. So that's why we're asking that question. When we read your implementation plan, number 1 sounds like it's that separate monitoring body, and number 2 sounds like it's talking about that equity committee that would be one of the advisory bodies to the governance structure.
All right, so one body is about measuring and monitoring equity metrics, and then one body is about making sure that distribution is equitable. Is that what?
The question here is, we do understand that part. The question here is, your first strategy, create a leading accountability group that develops and oversees equity goals for arts and culture organizations in Mecklenburg County. The question is, would it be appropriate to add, as part of the new governance process, comma, create a leading accountability group? The question, okay.
Second question.
The question is, in this case, so in your implementation plan, this one actually seems to be about the monitoring body. That would be, this is the monitoring body. So if you add as a part of the new governance process, create a leading accountability group, that would then mean, so it goes in the whole process. Okay.
So to us, this phrase sounds more like that would be relevant for the other committee that you've recommended, which is part of the governance structure.
Yeah, I was going to say, we talk about that in governance. So,
right.
So that would, I mean, I am fine with.
No, that's what we're saying is the number 1 body that they've recommended isn't the one that is mentioned in number 2, I don't think, priority 2.
What's the difference?
I'll let Charles explain the difference between the 2 groups.
I don't understand the question that you guys asked.
You know what? Maybe we just simplify, Priya. So here's the deal. So it's still a part of this body, which is still separate. It's still a part of the process.
The problem is you're talking about bodies being separate. This is just a priority and a strategy. Where this should reside, I think, should be under governance, regardless of, it's a governing process. And its job is to monitor what they say here.
Doesn't that show up differently?
This is a different entity than the governance structure.
About the independent entity that.
Independent from what?
And so in our discussions, if I can bring this back, in our committee, I wish more of our committee members were here. There was a concern about an oversight committee, a group that was monitoring equity, that if they were a part of the governance system, they wouldn't have an independent view of equity in our system. So one of our strategies was to have an independent body that would help with monitoring. Well, we had 2 parts, which was about monitoring how we're doing, monitoring the metrics, as well as how dollars were distributed, and making sure dollars were distributed equitably.
So the idea was being that, the body overseeing the distribution should be separate from there should be like a independent commission kind of thing to evaluate and ensure that
I'm sorry.
Can I say something about that? I have concerns about that because it's almost like it's just create a leading accountability measure that is embedded within the governance structure, because you can't separate funding/funders from that accountability. Because if the accountability group doesn't have any agency to say, you're not going to get funding if you do this or that, then it's all for naught. So it really needs to be embedded. So and I think it's a really important point. It really is, because that is, I can say from a council standpoint, nobody knows what they're funding. Nobody knows if institutions are using their buildings for other people, for other organizations. And so embedding that with the same authorization group who's approving that funding, it almost, to me, it sounds like it's an accountability measure that needs to be embedded in the governance process.
So I think that's the second group that they're talking about. So like in the governance structure, there are these subcommittees for priority 5. That would be what you're talking about. But I think they're talking about the folks who are making the independent assessment, that being an outside entity so that there's no bias inside of the assessment.
But they don't have any. They don't have any clout. They don't have any power.
No, but they would bring that to this group 5 that is attached to the power. Like there's another group that's a part of the governance structure who is responsible for holding that accountability across.
But if that's the case, then it would still be governance.
Still governance.
It would still be governance.
But I think similar to how we were talking about the marketing piece, and there would be outside entities that would actually execute marketing plans. I think there's just a distinction in what they're talking about. There being an outside group that handles the assessment portion.
So I understand what you're saying is an outside entity. I just don't think the practicality.
Yeah.
Look at it this way. Don't think of governance as just being this one thing that's in one place. Governance may sit there and say, once we add this, is that we've got to make sure there is someone monitoring the what's the wording here?
Equity goals.
Right. Now, the detail in terms of who's on that and all is a different story. We hadn't gotten to that level of implementation yet. So I like the statement as part of the new governance process, create, and you notice it didn't say governance body, governance process, because governance is a process. Go ahead and create the leading accountability, all that stuff.
Because I think what people are going to hear is, let's create another group also. I think that also could be problematic, that you're saying, let's create another group. And then as a funder, I would have concerns about that group having a conflict with what I want to fund, for instance. So at least if you're making it part of one governance structure, that's how things work. And it can be worked out within the governance structure.
Charles? Oh.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, is this potentially a place, rather than creating an accountability group? And I know this is a big part of your priorities, so I'm just throwing it out here. But is this a place where instead it may be an opportunity for external contracted research, assessment, evaluation, rather than it being a governing body or some kind of committee or task force or group that who knows who is appointing those people and who they are and everything, but instead that this would be a place, for instance, for researchers from the university or somewhere who would then, I mean, I actually know faculty who do this kind of work, and they would come in and they would do these kinds of studies of arts organizations, policies, boards, staff, programming, et cetera, and report on how well they are adhering to recommendations or whatever the language is for equity, inclusion, diversity, et cetera, rather than having a committee that does that. I mean, is that something that could be hired or funded as a research grant that hopefully then it really would be a disinterested, independent effort from this other stuff, that then reporting would be made to those groups or bodies that are then governing, that are then allocating funding, et cetera?
The question is, who holds account the governing body that you're referencing? So, I mean, to your point, yes, that research can be done, but how do we hold this, all of us to account to achieving the equity goals and metrics that we set aside?
Well, is it in priority two? I mean, aren't we proposing that it would be in priority two then, that there would be?
Yes.
Yes.
That what would be in priority, sorry, which would be in priority two?
That accountability would be embedded in the governance, that there would be accountability on these issues that would be, and then and then the question becomes, how do you know whether people are in fact living up to the expectations that have been determined? And then it would be not that there would be a committee of whoever, but that in fact there would be, whether it's the university or someone from some other university or whatever, or it's whatever, but it is an entity that this is what they do. They come in, they do the analysis, the evaluation, the research, and they issue the report, and they say, yes, according to the benchmarks that have been laid out, either this is happening or it's not, or here's where it falls short, or here's where it exceeds. And that would be something that would be done not by a volunteer committee, but actually by professionals.
So I guess in the private sector and
Microphone.
companies, right, the way we-
Microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. The way that I would think about it in a private company is that we have independent auditors like a Deloitte or a PwC. And so is it part of the governance process that every 3 years you have one of these firms come and do an audit of the
Exactly.
actual practices against our stated strategies and plan?
Exactly.
I was gonna say, the thing is, like, if it's not embedded in there, people can choose to take it or not. Whatever,
Right.
audit, research, all of that. And, I think the bigger question is how to the bottom line is a seat at the table and the decision-making that guarantees a level of representation across the board so that can be translated into the decisions moving forward. And how to have that level of different angles that can guarantee us a wider of net that represents our communities. I think that's the important thing. Or else what happened in different circles, I can just talk about the universities, that people can do things in a certain committee, but if we don't have that at the upper level of administration, no change will happen. The funding is gonna go always to the same side, all of that.
So let me just ask a question, and I'm trying to be mindful of time, but I don't want to rush too much, so I'm trying to balance the two. Going back to priority 5 team, how would you like it read? With all the things you've heard so far, what makes sense to you? That's what's called putting pressure on you.
Kevin,
First
may
of all,
I ask?
It feels like we are all in agreement that there needs to be some entity to make sure that,
The whole room agrees.
things don't continue the way it just always has.
The whole room agrees with that, I
Right.
think. Everybody said there's got to be,
Oh, sorry, can I ask, because I just want to summarize because I think what Task Force 5 has done is provide for both, right? Because your strategy 1 is the auditor model, providing for that. And then strategy 2 is the embedded committee that is part of the governance process and structure that makes sure it's part of what's happening all the time. Is that accurate, Task Force 5?
Correct.
so with that said,
Yeah.
how would you like it to read, so we
So
can?
let me ask a question, because I'm wondering if we say, as a part of the new governance process, create a leading accountability structure.
Or function?
Function that develops and oversees equity goals and metrics for measuring them.
Yeah, or evaluates or assesses or.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So it's under whatever the governance process is, but it is it's not a group. It's actually required that every X amount of 3 years, that an accountability /research
somebody.
measure or function
Yeah.
or accountability.
It's an equity audit.
Right.
It's an equity audit, exactly, an equity audit by an external expert.
Yeah, and then, but then the question, I think the audit is a great example. If financially someone doesn't pass their audit, right, that's like a big deal, right, financially. Like that could interrupt your funding.
Yeah, then yeah.
The challenge here is, do we have that same level of, when we think about an equity auditor, first of all, does that exist? And do we have that same level of, are we going to take what is said seriously?
So hold on a second. Two completely separate questions. First of all, let's
Right, but
agree
that's
to
what-
let's agree to what you want here. So let's do that, and then the implementation piece may talk about penalties or whatever you want to do when you talk about implementation. But what I want to do is get the strategy straight, not the consequences if you don't meet the strategy.
Yeah, because that's part of implementation as well.
Right.
So we may
So
need to
what
tweak
words
implementation.
do you like?
What Cindy had just suggested was create a leading accountability function.
I have a slight change to that. Right here, we're trying to prescribe the plan to some degree. It sounds like we're doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the first strategy needs to be that we're establishing a process or a standard, and then that leaves the ability down the line or through the implementation to come up with how often do we have an auditor? What happened? What's the process? You fail your audit, you have a chance to come back, and I'm just wondering if by creating a body or saying it's an equity auditor, we're prescribing too much of the process right now. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Charles and Manoj, but is it that you know exactly how you want it to go, or you want there to be a standard and a process that's created through this that ensures equity? And part of that might be establishing a group, it might be bringing in an independent auditor, or is that too soft for you?
Without having our group here, they were pretty adamant about this particular piece. I hear what everyone is saying in terms of having it as a part of governance, so I would agree to that. And I agree with that. Where I'm not clear, and maybe it's just because so I agree with it's a part of our governance that we're going to have accountability measures. That makes sense. And I also agree with that the idea is to have an outside organization to do the equity audit, and so that's maybe inside of the implementation. I guess if we have this as a strategy, so long as we don't lose the capacity to have an independent audit of how the sector is doing and how organizations are doing around equity, then, I'd be fine with it, so long as we don't lose that ability.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to suggest along those lines then, Kevin, what if it's more about the action? Because also I just looked back at the action steps under this strategy, and it does sound like they pretty much work with what you described, Cindy, in terms of whether it's this body or an auditor or whomever. So what if it was just a slight tweak about where it's something like conduct a periodic or regular, equity audit to ensure that equity goals are developed and either achieved or something like that for by arts and culture organizations in Mecklenburg County.
In a way, what I think, when I look here at what your outcomes are and your implementation steps, it seems to me that you want to say, as part of the new governance process, we want to ensure that that measures of of success in equity are defined and over time measured against by an external auditor.
Yes.
All right. If I sit here long enough.
Yeah, can you say that?
Measures
I got
of
some of that.
equity, and I didn't get it, ensure that measures of equity and are defined.
Something like
Yes.
that?
And progress is measured and evaluated by an external expert, consultant, expert, equity. Body, somebody.
External
I
audit.
just did
An
auditor.
external auditor.
External audit.
Okay, let's read that again.
Auditor, yeah.
Yeah, as part of the new governance process, ensure that equity goals are defined and progress is measured and evaluated by an external auditor.
At least.
Or how about evaluated and, I think you said reported was something that you were.
Evaluated. Well, yeah.
And I think you had the word regularly in there, so.
Yeah, regular, but, yeah. And here's what I think the measure's gonna be. So I don't know where we put this, but think about this. Is that this body will have to continue to get their funding from the city and county, will have to do updates of how they're doing their work. And that's where, to me, that report, the rubber meets the road.
You mean the metrics needs to be updated
I
regularly?
think we have to, that's not gonna be me, because I promise you I'm not
city
gonna be
and
on
county
this
would
board. Make it clear that as, I know the city and county are gonna require us to show, the people that are doing this, to show how the money's getting spent and are we meeting our strategic goals and our equity goals. It's gotta be one of their number one things they care about. We know that. So this audit is one of the things that has to get reported back to the funders.
Yes.
So that's in your implementation steps somewhere, I think.
I think it is. I think.
So-
yeah,
so-
this is- Yeah,
Does this look good?
What, does this look good?
yeah. In the red, does that work
And so
for
we're gonna,
folks?
we're gonna replace what's in red with one, or are we just adding something?
No, yes.
Number
red-
2 is
Gonna be-
now
Yeah,
replaced.
Sorry, did I accidentally?
Number 2 is gonna become 1, right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Replacing, yeah. Hold on.
That's good though, because he can see what it's replacing.
I know.
Oh, but you got rid of number 2.
I typed over something. It's fine.
It's okay, I've got it.
number
printed.
2.
We can
yeah.
read, we can, yeah.
So number 2 is really number 1.
Yes, yes, that's correct, yeah.
Can I throw one other thing out there? If you look at priority 5 and the language in priority 5, it appears to me that it really is about supporting organizations that have historically, and artists who have historically.
Hold on one second. Just let me interrupt one second, because I know people are leaving because we're past time. Does anybody who's leaving have any heartburn? Are we okay on this one?
Are you sure?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure we have consensus, because we talked about that. Okay, just want to make sure, because when I use your name to say everybody agreed, no, I'm just joking.
Aisha, we're holding you up.
I'm sorry, go ahead now.
You're going to the other point, the next point.
Well, I'm going to the point that within the context of the language of priority 5, strategy number 1 to me sounds like we are ensuring that funding is distributed among organizations in a fairer way to make sure that those who have traditionally or historically not been funded at an appropriate level will receive funding, whether they're organizations or individual artists. But what I wonder about whether the task force also meant, having read their implementation plan, is that large organizations that have been traditionally funded, whether it's museums, symphonies, ballets, operas, whatever, that there is some mechanism to hold those organizations accountable for a certain approach to equity within their staff, board, programming, et cetera.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is within your strategies, but that is not represented in your priority statement. So is that the right place for the strategy, or, so does that strategy need to move to the place where we're talking about all arts organizations, which would be one or two or something, or do we need to revise the priority statement to include not only equitable, inclusive support and funding for traditionally underfunded artists and organizations, but that also there is some kind of, I mean, are y'all following me here?
Yeah,
I am not. No, I will admit, I'm not following you, Meg.
I'm
Can
following
you?
Right now, the
I'm following.
priority statement does not anywhere in the priority statement does not anywhere suggest that this priority is concerned with how many minority or people of color or whatever are on the board of the Mint Museum. But if you go into the implementation,
Well,
there is
There are steps about that, yeah.
Steps
But I guess I
about
would say,
that.
but what I
It is
don't,
a great point. And, in the original statement, which is gone now, it does say, oversees equity goals for arts organizations in Charlotte-Mecklenburg.
so I don't,
I hear what you're saying.
I don't think it needs
I don't
to
think
be
we
in
need
the
to
priority,
change the
yeah.
priority. I mean, I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think you're bringing a good point to make sure that we're calling out, being explicit in our priority, that it's like here it feels like we might be just focused on small and mid-sized organizations, and we're leaving out institutions, and we are focused on those groups because we're trying to elevate them. And within the strategy 5, what we're trying to do is hold accountable the larger institutions to make sure that there's internal change that's happening with them that gets to a more equitable community for artists. And so I hear what you're saying.
Would it be helpful, I mean, because this is, I think some of this is contained, but maybe it's not as hard as you want it in there. And when it talks about equity goals are defined, like the goals are going to be baked in. But would it be helpful to say that as part of something, this is not the right words, but as part of the new governance process over organizations, or organizations and individuals that are funded, then they'd be subject to that. So that incorporates anybody. The Mint Museum gets $1 million. An organization down here gets $10,000. They're all going to be held to those same equity goals and standards. Would that address your core concerns to define that it's anybody that's going to get the funding?
whatever we put in a strategy, if it includes that measure, which I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing that, but it's not reflected in this priority. It's like an additional thing beyond what the priority statement is, that we're going to ensure that there is equitable, accessible, inclusive support and funding for traditionally non-funded, underfunded artists and institutions that have been historically marginalized. And we're also going to make sure that those organizations that have historically been funded at a large level, that they are held to certain standards or whatever.
I think what we want to say, I hear what they're saying, but I think what you're trying to say is just as well as all annually funded organizations will be measured on their progress to our equity goals.
Right, and I'm just wondering, is that something then, and this equity goals are defined, progress is regularly evaluated, is again, that's something that moves to priority 2. And that's part of all funding, like anybody who's coming for funding to this funding, public-private governing funding body, that there are certain values that we hold, whether you're big, small, whether you've been funded,
what Kevin said.
or not.
What Kevin said.
What Kevin said is exactly right. It is in there.
It's in there.
It is in there in a number of different ways and places and spaces.
and it's in there in the vision, it's in there in the philosophy, it's in there in priority number 2 under strategy. There's several different places where it appears. The priorities are statements that we are taking as, once we put them out there, the priorities are statements of fact, right? So this is a statement of fact that equitable, accessible, and inclusive support and funding are critical to advancing, growing, and sustaining BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and other artists and institutions, particularly small and mid-sized organizations that have been historically marginalized in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg arts ecosystem. And that's like a period, like that's a statement.
Right.
It's a statement.
And how diverse the board of the Mint and the staff are actually has nothing to do with that priority, is what I'm saying.
Correct.
So should that
But it-
audit show up in a different place?
I think it does.
Priority two.
Priority 2, strategy 2 is there.
That's what it says. Ensuring coordinated ongoing delivery of equitable and accessible and inclusive funding and services to and for the arts and cultural sector.
Okay, so do we need this strategy 1 as part of priority 5, or is that instead?
No, it's still a part of priority 5, I think.
I agree.
It's just, it's a strategy under their priority.
And now if we are in this space of, so because priority 5 and priority 2 are so inextricably linked, so both 1 through 5 are all linked to 2. That's why that linkage happens. And so that goes to your question on somebody's question on number 5, which is around shift the decision-making for funding and the direction of the arts and culture sector to be more inclusive and transparent. And the comment in this one that we received was, this appears that it might be more appropriate, not changing language, simply saying, it appears to be more appropriate to move this 1 strategy to priority number 2. The whole idea though, which is fine.
So let me answer that real quick. My thought is, first of all, I don't care which one it's in. It's fine in number 5 to leave it there, and the reason why I said it, because we already said in number 2, I don't quite see it there, but refer to number 5. No, you shouldn't have to go back, you don't have to do anything. It just says refer to priority 5.
Right.
So it addresses it, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so we basically, what we've tried to do in both language as well as with some icons in the implementation plan is direct people to look at priority 5 and see that the entirety of priority 5 relates to priority 2.
To the governance structure.
Yes.
It's critical to the governance.
But it's important enough to separate. Question.
So this last comment here, that's in highlighted here, right here, on here. This is actually not, the comment about moving this to priority 2 is because it doesn't necessarily just limit to questions of equity and inclusivity, et cetera. It's about transparency and an argument for having the public sector play a leading active role, leadership role in governance and funds delivery is to try to ensure greater transparency because it is in fact the public sector, greater transparency across all of the governance and funding, which would be, of course, applicable to questions of equity and fairness, but it would be applicable to all sorts of other questions because the transparency is something that is applied to the whole governance and funding structure and model. So that's the argument for moving that to priority 2 is so that transparency is not limited to just whether someone or an organization is equitable or whatever, but it's transparency across the board.
Okay, do people, hearing what Meg is saying, does it make sense then for people
So Dave, as I said, I don't care. Do you care either way?
Wait, I have a question because it relates to what Meg is saying.
David?
Because if we look at the action, so I agree, like, so what you're saying is inclusiveness and transparency goes beyond the topic of equity. It's even more than that. Totally understand.
So
I'm just being
we
mindful of what the action steps are underneath it, though, and of 4 action steps, 1 and 2 are phrased as relating to equity, and 3 and 4 are not phrased as relating to equity. They are phrased more broadly. So I'm just noting that about what the action steps are under this one. It doesn't mean it couldn't move. I just want to note you may then find yourself needing to
Separate
embed those steps somewhere else.
Okay, so-
Like the one about boards, that's in here.
So-
Yeah. Right, we can nest
So
those later.
let's do this. Let's go ahead and move that to number 2. We're fine with that?
Is group 5 okay with it too? Are they? Yeah.
So moving.
Just want to make sure both task forces are
All right,
okay
heck
with
group
it.
5. We're just to number 2. We're all good?
Or can we just put them in both? I'm fine with it moving. But
Okay, so I think we agreed on moving it.
Okay.
So what other questions do we have?
That's it.
So
I feel
strategy.
like
I have
5
one-
is discussing. I feel like
Go
group
right
5
ahead.
is discussing.
Punch me in the face if you want. I'm just wondering, you just made a statement, Kevin, that was, no, I know everybody wants to go, and I hate to.
No, I'm not trying to rush folks to go, but I didn't hear, you wanted
I
me
know,
to
I'm-
punch you in
I'm-
the face?
As always, I've got a long pre.
You're a violent person? Go ahead.
You made a comment a second ago that I thought was really interesting, and you know, you said priority 2 is linked to 1 through 5, which is correct. I don't think this is a major deal. Should priority 2 be priority 1? Even though we know that nothing happens without the money?
I think money's
If
first.
everything is hooked to that, why should that not be the primary?
So let me give you my 2 cents. I think there's a lot more linkages between 1 through 8 that we haven't talked about. So I don't think anybody is separate on their own. I think there's linkage, and if there isn't linkage amongst them all, we got other problems.
I like that
We've
answer.
just discussed 2 and 5 in that case.
Can we move 5 and make it 3, though? I mean, is there a logic to why 5 is 5? Could it be number 3? And then it would be in close proximity to priority 2, and so those things would be really read and consumed together?
It's okay with me. Okay.
I don't, yeah.
Okay, so just to recap, everyone's good with making priority 5 priority 3, so it's closer to priority 2.
Okay.
You guys were still, I think, deliberating on whether you're good with moving strategy 5 to strategy 2.
To 2, correct. So they agreed to that. Didn't you? Yeah,
Oh, okay.
they gave us thumbs
They
up.
were still chatting while you were talking to Tim.
They were talking about what they were going to do after the meeting.
Okay. They were talking about dinner. Okay. And then we'll worry about the action steps later where they need to move.
Yeah, you guys, I think you guys can figure that out.
Oh, take all the action steps with it? Okay.
Yeah,
We'll figure that out.
we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Team, thank you for hanging in there for 35 extra minutes.
Thank you very
We will
much.
not do anything else to close
Because you
except,
did that, we can stay on the schedule with the public strategy.
except we are now adjourning. And if y'all want to stick around, talk more, have fun.
We're out.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All seriousness, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm doing real quick.
I was going to turn your microphone off, but I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I have no idea. Actually, that's a great question.
Yeah, that's right.
Come over here.
You know, it's don't take long.
But we'll debrief tomorrow in our usual. Oh, okay. You want to find other time? Okay. Will you message us like with other time? You know, because we'll need.
I can do like 12.
Let me see. Oh, I have to look and wait. Let me see. Can I do it at 12? I don't know if I can do it at 12. Kevin, I'm not sure if I can do it at 12, but okay. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Yeah.
We got through this.
Yeah. Though this was the main.
Yeah.
I guess we'll have to figure out how to. I know that thing took 30 minutes almost. Not 30, but it just took up such a large amount of time that it ate up our other discussion time, and it was